There's a question that keeps circling through every conversation about Russia now, whispered in policy meetings, argued about on TV panels, and asked quietly by ordinary people who no longer recognize their own country. What awaits Russia in the decade ahead? Not tomorrow, not next week, but in 2035, when the forces already reshaping the country today finally reveal what they have been building. Whether the world likes it or not, Russia is too big, too close, and too entangled to ignore. It borders NATO, China, Central Asia, the Arctic, Eastern Europe, and every one of those borders carries its own fear, memory, and prediction. The question isn't whether Russia will matter in 2035. The question is what version of Russia will emerge. I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and today I want to do something different. Not guess the future. Predictions are cheap, but map the deep structural forces that will define it. The pressures that no election, no propaganda, and no decree from the Kremlin can stop. Here's our roadmap for tonight. What the future is made of. The raw materials shaping Russia's tomorrow. The dream of the imperialists. The Russia of power, fear, and eternal mobilization. The dream of the survivors. The Russia that just wants life to return to normal. The dream of the reformers, those who imagine a country built on law, not fear, the world without trust. Why Russia's neighbors no longer plan for partnership, only containment. The Chinese lens, how Beijing, Russia's most important partner, actually sees its future. If independent analysis matters to you, analysis without fear and without permission, you can support this work by liking, subscribing, sharing, or joining my think tank. Support through PayPal or SuperThanks genuinely keeps this channel alive. All right, let's begin. What a future is made of. A country's future is never just a dream. It is always a collision between what people want and what is actually possible with the resources they have. Russia's potential futures in 2035 are determined not by wishful thinking, but by a handful of hard constraints: people, money, skills, economics, and the web of international relationships that either sustain a state or leave it isolated. The first and most important factor is demography. A state is not its territory. A state is its people. And here Russia faces a crisis that is both obvious and underestimated. Official demographic data is increasingly hidden. Demographers reconstruct the picture from indirect signs, accidental leaks, and the occasional desperate proposals by regional officials who try to impress the Kremlin by promising new programs to boost birth rates. The reality is that the situation is worse than the published numbers suggest. Russia faces a shrinking and rapidly aging population. Birth rates briefly rose during the years of the maternity capital program, but that wave has long passed, and the trend is now sharply downward. The rich, those with Western documents, left early. Those without documents but with money resettle in the UAE and Cyprus. Dubai is now jokingly called Dubaisk because so many wealthy Russians live there. The middle class has frozen. In a time of instability, raising small children feels like a luxury few can risk. The poor, who historically had higher birth rates, are now the ones bearing the cost of war. The dead and the disabled come from their ranks. The economic situation is deteriorating, and that has a direct effect on family planning. As a result, Russia's typical citizen in 2035 will likely be a woman over 50 with declining health and limited income. Many will be alone. Children grow up and leave, husbands die, or there was never a husband to begin with. Russia, despite its traditional rhetoric, still has one of the highest divorce rates in the world. Meanwhile, the healthcare system is stretched thin. Funding is declining, trust in medicine is low, and good specialists are hard to find. Big cities with wealthier populations still manage, but smaller towns have almost no access to qualified help for complex conditions. Medical deserts expand every year, and the country is becoming a place where survival depends on geography and luck. The next constraint is the economy. Russia still depends on oil and gas revenues for roughly 60% of its budget. Yet the world's energy markets are changing. Prices are trending downward. China, Russia's main buyer, is slowing down because of its own demographic troubles. Russian oil reserves are not infinite, and new deposits cannot be developed without Western equipment. New competitors are appearing, including Guyana, and Venezuelan oil may soon return to the market. These are long-term pressures that will not reverse. Education and human capital add another layer of limitation. A country can compete only if it has people with the necessary skills. But those skills are leaving. Immigration represents a small percentage of the total population, yet the type of the people who live matters more than the number. Those who can succeed abroad are usually educated, resourceful, multilingual, and financially prepared. Not long ago, I attended a business meeting of Russian immigrants in Orange County. Who showed up? Software engineers, financiers, construction entrepreneurs, telecom specialists, university lecturers, and luxury jewelry designers. These are the people Russia lost and America gained. Of course, people of all kinds leave, including many who hope for luck more than planning, but even that requires some resources. Inside Russia, the education system is in disarray. Humanities are increasingly replaced by slogans, dogma, and moralizing, much like in the late Soviet period. Technical fields suffer because the older generation is retiring and the younger one was never properly trained. For years, the government abandoned the idea of developing indigenous technologies. It was easier to trade oil for microchips and airplanes. Those who do have expertise face constant temptation to move to a freer, more prosperous environment. Russia still has outstanding specialists, but the trend points downward. Political isolation accelerates technological decline. The financial picture is equally grim. The country runs a high budget deficit while military and security expenses continue to rise. It cannot borrow on international markets. Taxes are increasing against a shrinking economy. Inflation eats into savings. There is no capital for long-term investment. 10 years from now, Russia will face the consequences of what it failed to invest in today. Projects that should be funded now will not exist in 2035. Infrastructure that should be repaired today will simply collapse. Another limitation is foreign relations. Russia cannot rely on help from those who could genuinely assist. The West will not support it. China will not finance Russian modernization. It pursues its own interests. No realistic alternatives remain. Could Russia rely solely on internal resources as it did during earlier bursts of development? Historically, rapid advances happened when the central government severely exploited its population and built mega projects on the bones of millions. But whom can Russia exploit today? elderly women on limited pensions. Even exploitation requires money because someone has to guard the people being exploited. Those funds always came from foreign trade. In the late Middle Ages, Russia exported wax and furs. Under Peter the Great, it supplied material for European shipbuilding. Later came grain during Europe's rapid urbanization. Under Stalin, everything was exported to the West, from metals to icons. In the second half of the 20th century, the USSR survived because Western Europe, especially West Germany, paid for Russian gas and oil. The question for 2035 becomes unavoidable. With shrinking population, declining education, collapsing healthcare, deteriorating infrastructure, isolation, and a weakening energy market, what exactly will Russia trade with the world? The answer to that question will determine which futures remain possible and which are already closed. People inside and outside Russia picture the future very differently. Most understand that the road ahead is rush, yet their visions of how to confront these challenges vary wildly. Now, it's time to look at what is actually on the table. The dream of the imperialists. Every country has a group that dreams not of stability, but of power. In Russia, this group includes the political elite, the security services, the war economy, and loyalist patriots who build their identity around strength. Their worldview is shaped by fear of collapse, fear of the West, and fear of internal betrayal. They are convinced that only a hard, militarized state can prevent chaos. At the core of their belief lies a simple conviction: the West wants to destroy Russia and enslave its people. The irony that the only force destroying and enslaving Russians today is their own government does not occur to them. In their imagined future, the West will always try to undermine Russia, and the country's only chance of survival is to project power and force the world to accept the demands of the national leader. Sometimes I take grim pleasure in reading their social media posts. I understand why top officials and businessmen cling to this vision. Their wealth and safety depend on a powerful militarized Russia. But beyond them, there are many patriots whose lives have worsened dramatically since the war began. They complain about taxes, inflation, poor medical care, and failing infrastructure, yet never connect these problems to the war or the state that demands constant sacrifice. They see their suffering as a sacred contribution to the motherland. Militarization is at the heart of this future. The army, intelligence agencies, and police become the real centers of power. Institutions matter less than personal loyalty. National identity revolves around the idea of a permanent external threat. For those already in power, the ideal system resembles a modernized feudal network, with clans forming around ministries, state corporations, and the war industry. Those outside power imagine something softer and nostalgic, a romanticized version of the late Soviet Union before oil prices collapsed. In that fantasy, healthcare and education are free. People attend patriotic parades, sing songs, and feel unity and pride. Russia stands as the older sister, guiding the supposedly less developed nations in its orbit. This dream is emotionally powerful, rooted in fear and nostalgia, but completely detached from the country's real trajectory. The dream of the survivors. Most Russians do not dream of an empire. Their hopes are small and practical. They want steady work, predictable prices, safe streets, decent schools, and medical care that does not depend on luck. They want a life where the state leaves them alone, It is the most normal dream, and under current conditions, the hardest to achieve. For ordinary people, the ideal future is a return to normal life. In the collective memory, pre-COVID Russia was a good place to live. That view is not entirely accurate because during those years, the government was quietly dismantling civic rights and democratic institutions. But if someone did not follow politics, and in Russia, politics is considered a dirty, almost taboo subject, they lived in a world where planning felt possible, where dreams made sense, and where life seemed to improve slowly. The collapse began in 2020 with pandemic restrictions. After that, normal life started to fall apart. One of the biggest markers of new reality was fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing, fear that a relative might get into trouble, fear of drawing attention to yourself. Business owners remember the moment when sanctions cut off international payments. Panic spread instantly because so much of the Russian economy depends on imports. Yes, the economy eventually adapted from grey imports and deeper dependence on China, but everything became dramatically more expensive. Every product now includes hidden costs. The price of circumventing sanctions and the invisible taxes of a war that society pays collectively. The dreams of the survivors are modest. They want the war to end and life to return to how it used to be. But this group carefully avoids any conversation about how such a future could be achieved. Political literacy is low. The link between human rights and personal safety doesn't exist in their worldview. Politics feels dangerous and economics feels boring and incomprehensible. So no energy is invested there. Trust in the opposition is non-existent. They see opposition figures as people who want power for themselves because a normal person would never crawl into this mess. They have no complaints about Putin. Ask them whom they support and they will confidently say Putin made the country strong. They repeat cliches picked up passively over the years, even if they never watch state TV. These are the only messages that ever reach them. From time to time, social media surfaces heartbreaking stories. Salaries delayed, promised benefits withheld, bridges collapsing, houses left unrepaired, and then comes the ritual. A group of residents stands in front of a camera and records a collective plea to Putin, asking him to intervene. It is painful to watch. It is a direct descendant of the 17th century tradition of kneeling before the Tsar with a humble petition. The dream of the reformers. Reform-minded Russians want something far more difficult than stability or strength. They want a different country. Their perspectives vary, but they share one conviction: Russia cannot survive another century unless it changes itself. In their imagined future, the state is no longer built on fear. Power is limited by real laws. Courts function. Elections matter. Regions govern themselves instead of waiting for permission from Moscow. The security services follow rules rather than standing above them. History is studied rather than turned into a weapon. Russia remains large and complicated, but it becomes governable because its leaders answer to the public. But their dream faces enormous obstacles. Removing the current regime is possible only through military defeat or economic collapse. As long as the government can pay the army and security forces, unarmed citizens cannot change the system. Yet wishing for defeat or collapse means losing the support of the survivors, those who simply want stability and a return to pre-war life. There's also a deep cultural barrier. For generations, Russians were taught to identify themselves with the state. Criticism of government actions is perceived as a personal attack. This is the same psychological trap seen in closed sects, where an individual's identity is dissolved into the group. The Soviet system deliberately built this mindset in 1917, and it still shapes the national psyche today. And yes, I explore exactly how this collective identity was constructed in my Russian Treasures novels. Reviews are glowing, so if you love Russian history and literature, those stories will speak to you. Links are in the description. Escaping this group thinking is extremely difficult. When your identity is tied not to yourself or your family, but to your country, condemning the state feels like condemning yourself. For many, that is unbearable. The only antidotes are art and education, but where can they come from if censorship now punishes people even for searching extremist information online? And extremist information can be anything at all, whatever the investigator or judge decides. This is the weight the reformers carry. Their dream is noble, but the country is not yet ready to accept it. The world without trust. If Russians imagine their own future through the lenses of power, survival, or reform, the outside world sees Russia very differently. Its neighbors, Europe, the United States, and a growing number of countries in the global south and Asia, approach Russia as a long-term security problem. For them, 2035 is about managing the risks that flow from a large, unstable, nuclear-armed state. In the West, trust in Russia has collapsed. This is not a passing emotion. It is now a structural fact of international politics. Governments no longer believe that treaties, commercial partnerships, or diplomatic assurances can restrain Moscow's behavior. They see a country that treats agreements as tactical pauses, not binding commitments. Even if the political system in Russia changes, the trauma of the past decades will remain. Europe will not return to the model of cheap energy and deep economic ties. The United States will not treat Russia as a strategic partner. NATO will not shrink again. For Western policymakers, the question is not how to cooperate with Russia, but how to contain it at the lowest possible cost. The countries closest to Russia feel this distrust even more sharply. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland all view 2035 through a defensive lens. They expect Russia to remain unpredictable and militarized. They invest in infrastructure, civil defense, energy independence, and alliances that can withstand sudden shocks. They do not expect Russia to reform. They expect it to break, lash out, or both. Further south, in the Caucasus and Central Asia, Russia is increasingly seen as a fading power whose behavior is dangerous because it is insecure. These regions are quietly reorienting themselves toward Turkey, China, and local interests. They no longer believe Russia can offer stability or opportunity. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are already trying to reduce their economic and cultural dependence on Moscow. Armenia has shifted its security focus toward the West. Georgia and Moldova treat Russia as a source of permanent vulnerability. None of them plan their future around Russian leadership. In the global south, opinions are more mixed, but still pragmatic. Countries such as India, Brazil, and South Africa see Russia less as a partner and more as a geopolitical instrument. They appreciate the opportunity to buy cheap energy and gain diplomatic leverage, but they do not view Russia as a future engine of growth or technological innovation. They expect a weakened, isolated Russia that remains influential only in areas where it can cause trouble. The world's collective dream of 2035 is not about Russia's strength, but about minimizing the global impact of its decline. This external viewpoint is important because it defines the environment in which Russia will operate. A country cannot shape its future alone. It needs partners, markets, and degree of legitimacy. Russia has lost most of that, and the rest is sleeping. The international system around it is becoming more fortified, more skeptical, and more immune to manipulation. By 2035, Russia may discover that even if it wants to change, the world no longer gives it the benefit of the doubt. The Chinese lens. Of all external perspective on Russia's future, China's is the most influential and the most revealing. It views Russia as a resource, a buffer, and a partner of convenience. For Beijing, the ideal Russia in 2035 is neither strong nor collapsing. It is stable enough to resist the West, but dependent enough to remain predictable. The official Chinese narrative is polite. Governments in Beijing speak of strategic partnership, cooperation, and mutual support. This language is carefully chosen. China values Russia as a counterweight to American influence and as a supplier of energy at discounted prices. Russian oil and gas help China diversify its energy security. Russian diplomatic alignment gives Beijing more room to maneuver on the world stage. In formal speeches, China calls this relationship win-win. Outside the official script, however, Chinese analysts and business leaders are more direct. They see Russia's economy as fragile, its population as shrinking, and its technology as outdated. Some openly state that China must be careful not to become entangled in Russia's problems. Others express quiet satisfaction that Western pressure has pushed Russia into China's orbit. For them, Russia is convenient, but not essential. China's dream of Russia in 2035 is simple: a cooperative, dependent neighbor that keeps the West occupied, provides cheap energy, and avoids domestic collapse. It is a future in which Russia matters, but only on China's terms. When we put all these pieces together, the picture becomes clearer. None of these visions exist in isolation. Russia's real trajectory will be a mixture of them, tilted by pressure from the world and by choices that millions of people make every day. The question is, which force will become dominant as the country moves toward 2035? Will fear shape the future, or will fatigue force change? Will the world's distrust limit Russia's options, or will internal collapse push it into something new? And what role will ordinary citizens play if they continue to lose faith in the system that governs them? But I want to hear from you. Which version of Russia's future feels most likely where you sit? Do you think the country is already drifting toward one of these paths? Or are they closing one by one? Your answers help me understand the world you are seeing, just as this analysis helps illuminate the world I came from. If this deep dive gave you clarity, if it helps you see past the headlines to the forces that actually shape nations, please like the video, share it with someone curious, and subscribe. It is the simplest way to keep this channel independent. And if you'd like to follow the hidden threads, early chapters, and research shaping my upcoming novel, The Snow Queen Spring, you can join my Facebook, Instagram, or newsletter using the links below. You can also support this work directly through the Think Tank, Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal, or Super Thanks. Every gesture truly keeps this project alive. Thank you for watching, and thank you for thinking with me.